Welcome to the CSS Positioning topic video. In this video, we're going to understand what we mean by normal flow or layout of HTML pages. We're going to understand and be able to use the different CSS positioning types to alter the normal flow for certain elements or for everything, depending on what we're trying to do. We're going to understand and use the different positioning types of static, relative, absolute, and fixed. We're going to understand and then be able to use these positioning types along with a few other CSS properties to be able to create various graphical user interfaces that you've seen across the web. It's just CSS with a little JavaScript and HTML. Right. Okay, readings. Nice overall reading on positioning. A nice dedicated little section on CSS Dropdowns and a practical positioning example. That's from MDN. I'm going to have a slightly different take on that I'll run you through here, and then you'll get to see my code for. Okay, a really good reference, Invisible CSS. This is a good overall review, includes the cascade, positioning, and box model together. Kind of glues it all together nicely. I recommend that one too. Okay. So what is positioning about? Positioning in CSS allows you to take elements out of normal document flow. Okay. Make them behave differently. You might want them to sit on top of each other, or etc., blah, blah, blah. Okay? What do I mean by document flow? Individual element boxes are laid out by taking the element's content, then adding padding, border, and a margin around them. This is the box model. Okay? Covered the box model. Okay? So it's important. Everything gets the box. By default, a block level element, a block box, its content is 100% of the width of its parent element and as tall as its content. Inline elements are as tall as their content and as wide as their content. However, you can't set width or height on inline elements. We saw this before in the box model. Repeat it again to kind of see if we can get it to stick. If you want to control the size of an inline element, you need to change or set its CSS display property to block or inline block. So, normal flow. In normal flow, this is the normal flow in the browser viewport, block level elements are laid out vertically in the viewport. Okay? Each block level element comes after the next vertically. Inline elements sit on the same line as one another as long as there's space for them to do so inside the width of the parent block level elements. Okay? If it isn't spaced, then the overflowing texture elements will, misspelled, move down to a new line. Okay? One other piece of this normal flow is the margin collapsing we talked about. If two adjacent elements have margins set on them, and the two margins touch, the larger of the two remains. They don't add, you get the max of the two. We're going to see there are 4 positioning types. Some of these have some meaning, some of them it's like they all sound the same to me. So, that's why you have a nice little chart and remind yourself of these. Static, the same as normal flow. Relative is relative to where the item would have been in normal flow. Absolute is the location in its containers, and we got to be a little careful what I mean, in its containers coordinates as far as the absolute context. Okay. Fixed is relative to the Windows coordinates. Okay. So fixed, I know, sounds like static, which sounds like absolute. Okay? There's only so many words in the language. These are CSS meanings. Static, same as normal flow. Fixed relative to the window. Okay? Okay, relative positioning. Let's kick that off because we already saw static, because that's normal flow. A block that is relatively positioned, it's treated like it's still in the flow for the purpose of placing other elements. Okay? So space is set aside for it. You use top, bottom, left, or right CSS properties to adjust the block's position. If you don't use those, nothing gets adjusted. Okay, so here's this nice example that we're going to do. We're going to create a bunch of boxes as paragraphs. Okay, so let's look at the style. Position example with 20%. Background color, Alice blue. Okay, border, 1 pixel. Okay. Position example, reg. Okay. Regular. Whatever I meant by reg, I don't remember. Background color is yellow. Okay. Position example, we got these paragraphs. Okay. If you copy and paste this, well, because this is so nice and controlled, I can put it right in to our slide. Okay, let's take a look. Make sure we're seeing what we said we would see. Okay. We've got position example regular. Ah, that's what I meant by it. Okay. So all these paragraphs, okay, are normal flow. We haven't changed anything about their positioning. Okay. Position, we didn't change anything within either of these classes. Okay, good. Okay, and that's what it looks like rendered. Now, let's try setting one of these to have a relative position. Okay, so here we have class PosX. All these guys get that. Width is set the same. The background color is same. The borders set the same. Now let's see what happens. What's going to happen with this rule? This rule applies to both classes. This is a combinator of PosX class and the rel2 class. Okay, so here are the two classes. This one, I'm going to give it a different background color. I'm going to set its position relative. I'm going to tell it top minus 20 pixels, left 20 pixels. These are offsets from where the top would have been and where the left would have been. Let's take a look. Ah, so what did we say again? Left 20 pixels over, top 20 pixels? It moved up, not down. Ah, remember our coordinate system. What's our coordinate system? X increases to the right, Y increases down. Okay, this is used in a lot of computer graphics too. I know we all got used to the other way of doing things. Let's take a quick look, and we can even try adjusting this a little bit. Okay. So paragraph 2, paragraph 2. Here's our paragraph 2. Okay, here's the styling for paragraph 2. We look at this element. We see the top was moved 20 pixels. Let's turn that off. Oh, okay. And it comes back, the top position comes back in. We turn off the left, and it's right where it would have been anyhow. If we turn off position relative, it goes back. The top and the left have no meaning. Okay. But notice space was left for it. Relative position is relative to where it would have been, and space gets left for the element. Okay. Why relative positioning? The thing I've used this the most for is small adjustments. If I bring in like some graphics and I want to line things up a little better, I use a little bit of relative positioning with a little bit of offsets, okay, to move things around so things line up nicely, okay. There are other uses. Note, the values can be positive or negative, okay. Nifty effects you can do because it saves space, okay. Remember, the space is kept there for it. Nice property. Let's see about absolute, would it? Okay. Let's try an absolute example. Div style position relative. What's that about? We're going to see in a second. Pause X, we do all the same thing here, but now we're going to give the second paragraph here. We're going to give it background color yellow like before, position absolute. Then we're going to say top 20 pixels and left 20%. Couple things going on here. Let's take a look at the element. Make sure it's what we see. Okay, so this got absolutely positioned. Notice paragraph 1, then paragraph 3, then paragraph 4. It got taken out of the flow. Okay, no space was left for it. Okay, if I come in to this element, I see this positioning top. I want to change that value to say 30 pixels. Okay, I can move it down. If I want to change it to 300 pixels, I can move it way down. Okay, what happens? Let's move it to the left a little bit. 10%. Notice it can cover up the other elements. Okay, we can do that also with relative. So what's the difference? The biggest difference with absolute, there's a couple differences. First of all, doesn't leave space. And two, it's referenced not to where it would have been, but to its parent container. So that's why it's absolute. It's relative, it's to not itself, relative where it would have been, but to its container. Okay. You need to have top, bottom, left, or right. Okay, usually use a combination of top, a horizontal coordinate, left or right, and a vertical coordinate, top and bottom. I don't know what'll happen if you give it top and bottom. Okay, it's taken out of the flow completely. No spaces left. Okay, now I said it was relative to its parent. Well, that's not quite right. It's relative to what's known as a positioning context. By default, HTML element is the positioning context for an absolutely positioned item. We can change this to another ancestor of the relatively positioned element by adding the style position relative to the container element. Huh? Why would they come up with that? It's a hidden feature. Okay. I had a bunch of interesting work where I was working with positioning. Okay, and I wanted to get the positioning working. And it didn't work. And I couldn't figure out why. And it's because it's not its parent, but it's this positioning context. It will default to HTML. And we're going to take a look at that, the master element, the whole page. Okay, that's why, let me just check. That's why, way back here, I put this div style position relative in here. Okay, if this wasn't in here, it would have been relative to the whole HTML document. It would have zoomed out of here. You wouldn't even see it. Okay, we'll take a look with that. I've got another example. Okay, positioning context. Usually it's not something you use all the time, but good to remember there's something there. Z-index. What happens when things overlap? Can we control what gets put on top of what? Yes, we can. Z-index allows us to control that. Okay. An element with a larger z-index generally covers an element with a lower one. So we make z-index larger. Okay. The default, I think, is 0. Okay. So let's take a look. Z-index example 1. So we're going to use absolute positioning on all these things. Let's see. Offset, paragraph offset 1, background color, position absolute. Notice I increment these top ones just a little bit by a little bit. Okay, and then the left a little bit. I cooked up those values so I would get something nice like this. Okay, these are all positioned. Okay, so the overlap is in document order, meaning, okay, paragraph 1, paragraph 2, paragraph 3, paragraph 4. These offsets all come through in their ordering. Okay, we have not manipulated the z-index at all. Okay, so this is how this would normally look. Okay, now let's try using a z-index. Okay, I'm going to come up with a new thing here. Okay, p raise z. Okay, so here's a class that I'm going to apply to one of the elements, this third paragraph, para 3. Okay, and what does it do? It raises the z-index to 5. Okay, the effect will be, oh look, it brought up the third paragraph. You can see the block. Okay, let's try it again. This time we'll put this class raise z. We'll put it on paragraph 2. Comes on up. Why use absolute positioning and z-index? It's great for all sorts of effects with layered content. Tab panes, etc., etc. Good for stuff relative to a container. Okay. You've seen these effects. Okay. Caution. When things that you are stacking are in different containers, things can get tricky. There are rules for this situation. And it's confusing enough that they actually wrote a guide to z-index stuff. Okay, the third dimension, z-index. Okay. Before we go on, let's just take one extra look. Okay, so here's a document. Okay, I'm showing a style sheet. Okay, let's look for the absolute. Oh, there's nothing to see yet. I've got this button up here. This is the syllabus. Okay, I like to add tables of contents to be able to make it easy to navigate. I've got a table of contents that I can move in and out. Okay, how do I do this? Okay, let's look for position. Oh, sorry, that's fixed position. We're about to cover fixed position. Sorry. Fixed position isn't similar to absolute. Okay. Fixed positioning fixes an element in place relative to the browser viewport itself. It means that you can create useful UI items that are fixed in place, like persistent navigation menus and such like that. Okay. I can't demonstrate it in the slides. Okay. You also don't need fixed positioning. You can just use absolute if your page doesn't scroll. Okay. Hence, we'll need a page with enough content to scroll. I made a page. Okay, so click here to look at it. Let me show you it here. Now, I cheated to make this scroll. Need to scroll. How did I cheat? I made the width. I made the width of these paragraphs, or let's see what I made the width of. Body, section, class, blabber. Look how narrow I made this width here, 200 pixels. I turned it off. You see it gets very wide. There's no scrolling needed. Okay, so this is my blabber section, full of all sorts of stuff that I created with one of those online generators of placeholder text. Okay. Right now, we have static, meaning regular positioning of what? Well, let's take a look. Of the header. Okay. Header, background color, color with blah, blah, blah. Okay, what's in the header? Our branding area, this div here that has a couple controls in it, I call controls. Okay, so it's this header area. Okay, if I click fix, oh, nothing seemed to change much. Okay, now I added the class fixed head. Down here, it says position fixed. Now, what happens when I scroll? Oh, the header stays in place. It's always there. You've seen this effect a bunch. Okay. Static, it scrolls away. Okay. Fixed, it stays put. Gee, Professor, we couldn't see that ourselves. Okay, there's a couple things. You need to set up for this to work right. I mean, it'll partially work, but not behave then sometimes goofy if you don't set a vertical and a horizontal position. Okay, so you must set top. You must set a top and right or left and bottom or some combination of. Okay, you may also need to set the top margin of the following element to move it out from under the fixed element depending on your application. Okay. Well, we've been staring at this fixed example, so let's go back here and see what I meant by that. Okay. Well, Professor, it looks just great. Oh, yeah. What's this? Blabber, adjust blabber. Adjust blabber is a class that has a margin top of 98 pixels. Wow, what's all that margin about? If I get rid of that margin, look. The top of all my text is cut off and is invisible underneath this header. Oh, doesn't it know better? No, of course it doesn't know better, because fixed, like absolute positioning, takes the item out of the context, okay, out of the flow. This other, my blabber section, is in the normal flow, okay? Normal flow doesn't know about this fixed guy up here, okay? I need to take care of that, okay? I need to add some margin. If I don't add the margin, they won't be able to see that. When I go to static positioning, I don't need that extra margin on top. So I remove that header. Okay. You know what I'm doing here. I have a button that I have these two checkboxes, radio buttons. I listen for the change. And what am I? Okay, when I go to fix, I add the fixed head class to the header and adjust the blabber. Okay. Go to static. I don't need to add that class here, and I don't need to add the adjust blabber class. Okay, so we do these things by adding and removing classes. Okay, we can make those classes rather than changing an individual CSS style property. Okay, here's the toggling of those classes. Okay, don't worry about the onload stuff. That will be covered in another section. Okay, there's my CSS. Okay, let's look at a couple more examples. Okay, one popular one is what are known as CSS dropdowns, like drop-down menus. Okay. We're going to use, to create these drop-downs, we're going to use the display property. We're going to use a relative position to establish the context, because remember we talked about that context. And we're going to use absolute positioning for the drop-down or pop-up. Okay. So, let's see. Mouse over me. Oh, there's a pop-up. I didn't say these were going to look nice. I said we're going to see how it's done. Mouse over me. Another. Hello, web dev. Okay. They're pop-ups. How does this work? Let's start. Okay. First of all, I wanted to isolate this example from the rest of my slides, so I put it in a div with an ID, and I'm going to make everything, all my styling relative to that. Okay. Look, I start with a class dropdown. Inside the class dropdown, I have some text, span, mouse over me. Ooh. Then I have a class within that, a div. Okay. But I say dropdown content. Okay. Now here I wanted to make sure the same styling could work in another context. Okay. So I wanted to make sure this would work in multiple places. Okay. So, and we saw that. So what am I going to add for styling to do this? Okay. The div class dropdown used for setting up the individual dropdowns and as a hover target. Okay. Div class dropdown content holds the content of the stuff we're going to pop up or drop down or whatever. Okay. Notice, once again, the ID selector here is just to isolate this from the rest of the slides. Dropdown class gets position relative to X, and that's there to establish the context. Okay. Why do I have inline block? Oh, I think it's because I wanted to give this some width. Okay. Span, inline block. Okay, that's going to be just for styling of the span. Okay. CSS for dropdown 2. Now, dropdown content. Display, none. None? Why are we putting position absolute if display is none? Stay calm. Okay, left sets it from its container left, top from its container top, background color, I give it a background color. Why am I doing all this if it displays none? Oh, look at this. Okay, I set up everything here. I even set up the Z index. Okay, look what happens here. Drop down hover, drop down content. Oh, on hover, the drop down content, So on hover of the drop down hover, drop down content gets turned into block. So this goes from display none to display block when it's in the context of hover. Okay. Not just here, but in the whole context. That means I don't have to keep my mouse over here, even anywhere in here. And this is how people make clickable things too, to make drop-down menus. Okay. So we have nesting, class dropdown. This sets up the whole thing. Span. Okay. This is going to, the dropdown is going to be our entire hover target. Okay. We're going to set up all these guys to show nicely. Okay. And then when on hover, we change the properties of this drop-down content from display none to display block. Easy peasy. Until you want to make it look perfect, and then you spend a lot of time tweaking things. Okay. Okay. What else? How about tab panes? Okay. You've seen tab panes before. MDN does this. I have a similar approach that I'm going to do here that's both similar to MDM and Bootstrap. Okay, so that's my example tab pane implementation. I'm going to walk you through, okay, right now. Let's clear up some of these things. We can easily switch back and forth. So what is a tab pane? Basically, crudely, I'm going to have these like 3 button-ish things to click on up here. I'm going to use links. Okay, when I click on one of these things, it's going to change the content within the tab. Okay, so this is my example. This is an animated GIF just so people that view this can see what it's supposed to do without opening up the other file. The other file actually has better looking. Okay. So basically, I click on one of these tab things, and I get new content within the box. Yes, there should be more styling and make this all look nice. No, I'm not going to do it. It takes a long time. Robust design. One of the challenges of these things is also making sure that it's not sufficient that I can just do this once, but what if somebody wants to have 2 of these tab panes on a page? Okay, so here we have a tab pane down here and a tab pane up here, both working. Okay, so here's our design. We need clickable items to initiate the showing of information in each of the tab panes, okay, i.e. those things that we click, the tabs. Okay, we're going to have all the panes occupy the same absolute location within a container. Okay, we will then change the z-index in response to clicks. Okay, so it's all going to come down to z-index. Okay, so what kind of structure are we going to have here? Tabbed HTML structure. So the HTML structure that we need here, this is for us to specify. Okay? When you go and use a CSS framework or components, such as tab panes, they need structure. Okay? They're going to tell you that you should have elements, and you're going to assign different classes to different parts of those elements. Okay, so here I have a section. This is going to contain all my tab panes. Okay, I'm going to give it a class. I'm using classes rather than IDs here for generality. Okay, I don't want only one on the page. I want to be able to use as many as I want. So I'm going to have that outer section thing that's going to hold the entire tab pane. I'm going to give it this class tab panes. Then I'm going to have an inner structure is where I have the controls, the little things I'm going to click on. Okay, I've got these lists of controls. So I put them in a list, an unordered list. Okay, and that's where I'm putting these. Now within those, I'm using links because I'm kind of going someplace. Do you have to use links? No, you don't. You don't have to use links. Okay, I just decided to do that because I'll get to illustrate another thing. Okay, now, so those are the control part. Then I want a place we're going to keep the panes. Oh, div class panes. Then for each pane, I'm going to have an article, something that stands alone. Okay, I'm going to give it an ID, and the one that's going to be active gets the class active pane. Okay, so that's how that's going to work. Okay, that's how we're going to make this work. That's the structure. Let's look at the CSS. Okay, so this repeats what I just told you. Let's look at the CSS. The thing that's going to make this work is this one class that we're going to add and remove from the different panes. What does it do? Active pane, it sets the Z index to a bigger value than 0, which will bring things to the front. Okay, other things I threw in here, I'm using border box sizing to make it easier to get boxes the same size. I gave the tab panes a specific height. Okay, this is the overall structure of the section. Okay, I show that off with this red border, this red dash border. Okay, I want to put the whole thing so I know its extent. No, nobody wants a silly red border like that. I'm just doing that to show you the overall container. Okay, this is my section, class tab panes. That's where I'm going to do my magic. Okay. Div panes. Oh, what's this for? What is the div panes? Position relative. What's that doing? Okay, so here's my section. Okay, here's my tab controls. Here's my div with class panes. Oh, this contains all the different articles which represent the different content panes, right? These things change. Okay. This is going to be the context where these get their styling from, okay? Okay, good. Panes article, div panes. What is this? This is a child, okay? The direct descendant of div panes. I can put anything I want within the articles. They won't be affected by this styling. It's just the first article, the child of div panes, that's an article, okay, gets this styling. I set a fixed height. I'm going to set overflow auto because this is going to have a fixed height, okay. Position, boom, absolute. I'm going to put it where I want it, okay. I'm going to have it take up, I'm going to put it right at the top, right to the left, okay, top left. It's going to take a certain amount of height. I'm going to have it take a bunch of full width, even if it's shorter. Now, what am I doing here? Background color white. Opaque. What does opaque mean? Okay, let's take a look. So, active pane. First tab. So when I click these different buttons, oh, look over here. Different ones of these get set with active pane. Okay. Now, let's take a look via the style sheet. Okay, so what were we talking about? We were talking about this background color, white. Okay, I got to comment that out. Okay, so over here I ran my control divide, control slash. Ugh, this is really ugly. What happened here? Doesn't seem to make any difference what thing I click. What I'm getting is a mess. Why? Because the tabs, without a background color, the background is clear on these paragraphs, on these sections, okay? So what I did by adding a background color to the article, I make it opaque so you can't see through it, okay? What's the width 100% about? Let's get rid of that. What is this? Oh, the second tab, short. It doesn't have all that content in it. You can see it ends here. It's border without the width 100%. Let's put that back. Ah, these are all the little things that grab you, okay? But what's the main idea here? Okay, the main idea is, as we saw, changing the Z index. But we do need a bunch of other styling to help us move things around and have things look appropriate. Okay. Positioning, tab controls. I put the tab controls inline blocks so I could lay out the UI things. Okay, let's take a little quick look at the CSS. JavaScript responds to clicks on the A in the tab controls. You need to stop default behavior. Okay, we saw it adds or removes the active pane class. Good, good. Okay. Let's take a look. Let panes, tab section, query selector all. Okay. Sorry. Let's go to the top. Okay, so how does this work? Here's my function tab click. This is gonna do stuff with the tabs. Its job, as we see, don't get all caught up with all that stuff. Okay, is basically going to remove active pane from all the panes and then add the active pane stuff to the one we just clicked. Okay, that's what all that does. Whether that's the most efficient code to do it, another story. Let's look at this onload thing. Okay, don't worry about onload, but this is just the initialization. Tab controls, document, query selector, tab controls, li. Okay, what I'm doing here is getting every one of those tab controls places to click on. Okay, okay, and I return it from the document, so it's got to be tab controls and li, and then in here, tab controls for each function. I go through each of these. TC. This is how I'm adding the event listener to all those controls. Okay. This is why because I'm adding it to that one control, I need to do a little bit of going up the hierarchy to find out the tab section and do those kind of various things and such. I don't guarantee that this is the slickest programming to do it, but it worked. Okay. Now, the one thing we saw here, we do use prevent default. Why am I doing that? Because I'm using, what are these? These are links. They want to take me to a new page or somewhere else in the page. Okay? I don't want that behavior. So we were talking about tab panes, and we said, I wonder what would happen if we didn't say event, prevent default. Okay, so we're going to try commenting this out. First, though, let's double check how this tab pane example works normally. Okay, click the tabs, things move into view, etc., etc. Come down here, I get the challenge of the waves, and I click on these things, and I can see, okay, no side effects, everything seems well behaved. Okay, let's try commenting out that one line that I suggested. So I said that these things we're clicking on are links, and links like to go someplace. Okay, save it. No effect. Because you need to reload the page. Okay, so I said these things are links. Links like, it jumped to the top. Okay, it didn't do anything anymore. What if I click down here? It jumps to the top. Because they're links. Do they have anything in them? Not much difference. Okay, so these links actually get activated. Okay, they're trying to move things into view as best they can. That's not the behavior we wanted. Hence, an example of why we use event prevent default. Reload it. Now our page doesn't jump around as we switch tabs, given that if we want to use links in here. Nice thing is, that is kind of the purpose of links. Okay. CSS Positioning.